My son-in-law invited me to dinner, thinking I was nothing more than a poor, simple old woman he could easily ignore. What he didn't know is that I owned the company he proudly ran as CEO. I didn't come to expose anything. I came to observe how they treat someone they believe has nothing. But then his father slowly slid an envelope across the table. And baby, in that exact moment the entire room collapsed into silence, and everything changed forever. Before we get into today's story, sweetheart, if you love powerful grandma stories filled with secrets, drama, and unexpected twists, go ahead and hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications right now. It really helps support this channel and lets me bring you more emotional stories just like this one. And trust me, this one is something you won't forget. My name is Lorraine Bennett, and at 67 years old, I own one of the largest transportation and industrial supply companies in the Midwest. Most people don't know that, and I work very hard to keep it that way. For the last 24 years, Bennett Cross Logistics has quietly moved medical freight, construction materials, and manufacturing equipment through 13 states without ever making headlines. That's the kind of business I like. Quiet money, quiet power. The loud folks usually got something to prove. Now if you saw me outside my little white farmhouse in Danville, Virginia, watering roses in house shoes and an oversized sweatshirt with coffee stains older than some marriages, you'd never guess I signed contracts worth more than private jets. Honey, you'd think I was somebody's retired auntie living off coupons and sweet tea. And honestly, that's exactly the image I prefer. See, people show you their true selves when they think you're harmless. That lesson alone made me millions. Now my daughter Savannah, Lord have mercy. That girl inherited my stubbornness and her daddy's soft heart, which is a dangerous combination in this world. Savannah was 34 years old and divorced for almost 3 years when she met Ethan Calloway. They weren't married yet, but they'd been dating seriously for over a year. And I could already tell my daughter was starting to picture forever with him. That alone made me nervous, because hopeful women ignore things older women notice immediately. Then Ethan walked into my kitchen one Sunday afternoon wearing a tailored coat, polished boots, and a smile so smooth it could have sold beachfront property in Arizona. The man looked like he belonged on the cover of a finance magazine. Now to be fair, Ethan was respectful as all get out. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Miss Lorraine, this peach cobbler is incredible. Smooth. Too smooth. And maybe that sounds unfair, but when you've spent decades negotiating with wealthy men who hide knives behind compliments, your instincts get sharp enough to cut paper. Still, Savannah looked happy. Not obsessed. Not desperate. Happy. There's a difference. And honestly, that scared me more. Because happiness makes women hopeful. And hopeful women miss warning signs. Now here's the part nobody knew. About a month after meeting Ethan, I quietly had my attorney team pull his background. Judge me if you want. I raised a daughter alone after burying my husband at 41, while simultaneously building a company from 2 delivery trucks and a borrowed warehouse. I did not survive all these years by ignoring my gut. The reports came back spotless. Actually irritatingly spotless. MBA from Vanderbilt. Former executive consultant. Excellent financial records. No scandals. No lawsuits. No messy secrets buried somewhere in Nevada. Nothing. And the more I learned about him, the more uncomfortable I became because the man was genuinely impressive. I hate when my instincts can't explain themselves. That kind of feeling sits in your spirit like bad weather. Then one night in late September, Savannah came over carrying Chinese takeout, and that nervous smile women get when they're trying to act casual about life-changing news. Mom, she said slowly, Ethan got offered a CO position. Now that made me pause immediately, because very few companies hand a man his first CEO role before 40. And one of those companies happened to belong to me. What company? I asked carefully. Savannah smiled. Crestline Industrial. I nearly dropped my fork into the lo mein. Because Crestline Industrial was mine. Well, privately mine. Officially, the company operated under investment boards, corporate layers, and executive management structures thick enough to confuse the IRS itself. Most employees had no clue who actually owned the business. And Ethan? Honey, Ethan had absolutely no idea the older woman folding laundry in front of him owned the entire company he was about to run. Savannah knew, though. That child laughed so hard she almost spilled sweet tea all over my kitchen counter when I told her. "Oh my God," she wheezed. "Mom, this sounds like some Netflix billionaire drama. I call it responsible parenting." "No, ma'am." She pointed at me with an egg roll. "This is rich lady surveillance." Maybe she was right, but I let Ethan take the position anyway. Not because I wanted power over him, and not because I thought he was after money. I needed to know who he became once real power touched his hands, because money doesn't build character. It exposes it. For almost a year, Ethan impressed me. Seriously, the man was smart. He modernized warehouse operations, fixed a shipping issue that had been bleeding money for years, and increased profits without firing half the company like most executives would have done. Every quarterly report made me simultaneously proud and annoyed. I couldn't find a flaw. And slowly, against my better judgment, I started trusting him. That was my first mistake. Because trouble rarely arrives looking like trouble. It usually arrives smiling. Mine showed up on a cold Thursday evening in January. I was halfway through watching an old detective rerun when my phone rang. Ethan. Now Ethan usually texted, called on holidays, checked in respectfully. But random evening calls? No. That immediately put my nerves on alert. I answered, "Well, hey there, corporate America." He laughed softly. "Evening, Miss Lorraine." That voice sounds nervous. Company falling apart already. "No, ma'am," he chuckled. "Actually, I wanted to invite you to dinner." That caught my attention. "Oh, my parents are visiting this weekend," he said carefully. Savannah thought it'd be nice if everybody finally sat down together properly. Now listen carefully because this is where my instincts started screaming. Something deep in my chest shifted the second he said it. Not fear. Recognition. Like hearing footsteps behind you in a dark parking lot. "They've been asking about you," Ethan added casually. And there it was. That sentence. The one that made my stomach tighten. "They've been asking about me?" I repeated calmly. "Yeah," he said too quickly. "You know how parents are." "No, baby. I know exactly how strategic people are. And strategic people never ask unnecessary questions." I almost declined right there. Lord knows I should have. But I built my entire life walking directly toward uncomfortable situations, not away from them. So I agreed. The restaurant was called Marlowe's. One of those fancy downtown places where the waiters describe butter like it has a college degree. I wore an old brown cardigan on purpose. Simple earrings. No makeup except lipstick. Let them underestimate me. That's always when people get careless. Ethan met me outside looking tense enough to crack glass. "You look nice," he said politely. "I look warm," I replied. He laughed. Too fast. Inside, his parents were already seated. And sweetheart, the second his father stood up smiling with both hands stretched toward me, I knew something was wrong. See, guilty people are always too welcoming. Always. His daddy introduced himself as Victor Calloway. Tall man. Silver hair. Country club smile. The kind of man who practices sincerity like it's part of his golf swing. His wife Diane touched my arm gently. "Oh, Lorraine," she smiled. "You are just precious." Precious. There it was. The exact moment I realized they saw me as harmless. Good. That's my favorite role to play. Dinner started pleasantly enough. Small talk. Polite smiles. Savannah chatting nervously. Ethan barely touching his steak. Victor asked about my little garden behind the farmhouse. Not my career. Not my past. The garden, which told me he'd researched just enough to feel confident, but not enough to realize who he was actually sitting across from. And then, about 45 minutes into dinner, right after the waiter cleared our plates, Victor Calloway slowly reached inside his suit jacket and placed a thick cream-colored envelope directly in front of me. Savannah froze. Ethan looked down immediately. And honey, that was the exact moment I realized this dinner had never been about family. It was about leverage. Victor folded his hands calmly. Lorraine, he said softly, there are some things about your past we believe deserve a conversation. I looked at the envelope, then at Savannah. My daughter looked completely blindsided, confused, hurt, and deep in my chest, an old memory I buried almost 30 years ago slowly came back to life. I leaned back in my chair, smiled politely, and thought, well, now here comes the storm. Now let me tell y'all something about powerful men. The truly dangerous ones never raise their voices first. No, they smile. They pour drinks. They act civilized while trying to slide a knife between your ribs under the tablecloth. And sitting across from Victor Calloway that night, I could feel the performance starting. That cream-colored envelope sat between us like a loaded gun nobody wanted to touch first. Savannah kept looking back and forth between me and Ethan like she was trying to solve a math problem with missing numbers. Ethan, she finally asked softly, what is this? That boy looks sick. Not nervous. Sick. Like somebody had handed him a steering wheel and forgot to mention the brakes were cut. Dad, he started carefully. Victor lifted one finger without even looking at him. And Ethan stopped talking immediately. Now that caught my attention. Because confident men don't usually shrink unless they learned early somebody at home taught them to. Victor smiled at me again. Cool. Controlled. Practiced. Lorraine, he said. Before this goes any further, I want you to understand this conversation doesn't need to become unpleasant. Honey, anytime somebody says that, the unpleasant part already started. I folded my napkin slowly into my lap. Well, thank goodness, I smiled politely. At my age, I charge extra for unpleasant. Savannah almost laughed. Almost. Victor didn't. He slid the envelope a little closer toward me. You may want to look through those. Now listen carefully, because this right here matters. Most people, when confronted unexpectedly, rush to defend themselves. That's fear. Fear always moves fast. But confidence takes its sweet time. So instead of opening the envelope, I picked up my water glass and took the slowest sip of my life. Then I reached for a dinner roll. Butter too. Baby, I buttered bread like we were at Sunday brunch instead of a corporate ambush. The silence stretched. Diane shifted in her chair first. Victor's smile tightened around the corners. Ethan still couldn't look at me. Good. Let them sweat. Finally, after nearly a full minute, I dabbed my mouth with the napkin and said, well, if this envelope is supposed to ruin my evening, I'd at least like dessert first. Savannah blinked. Mom! Victor gave a short laugh, but there wasn't any warmth in it. You're calmer than I expected. That made me smile wider. Sugar, at 67 years old, if my blood pressure still jumped every time a man slid paperwork across the table, I'd have died during the Clinton administration. That one almost got Ethan to laugh. Almost. Then I finally opened the envelope. Inside were photocopies, old financial documents, legal records, letters. And the second I saw the name printed across the top page, my entire chest went cold. Harold Mercer. Lord. Now there's a name I hadn't heard spoken aloud in almost 30 years. I leaned back slowly, and suddenly I wasn't in a luxury restaurant anymore. I was 31 years old again, standing inside a freezing warehouse in Chattanooga with steel dust on my jeans and betrayal sitting across from me wearing a friendly smile. See, long before Bennett Cross became successful, there was another company, Mercer Freight Solutions, started by me and a business partner named Harold Mercer. Back then I was broke in the specific way only young parents understand. Working 16-hour days, eating canned soup 3 nights a week, trying to keep lights on while raising a little girl who still slept with stuffed animals. For 5 years Harold and I built that company together from absolutely nothing. Or at least, that's what I thought. Turns out Harold had been siphoning money slowly through fake vendors and shell accounts for nearly 2 years. Not enough to trigger alarms immediately. Just enough to slowly bleed us dry. See, greedy people rarely rob you all at once. They nibble first. By the time I uncovered everything, he'd already started building another company using our clients, our contracts, and my industry relationships. And baby, when I found out, I did not scream. I did not cry. I got quiet. Quiet women are the ones people should fear most. I spent 7 months collecting records, transfers, emails, fraudulent invoices, forged signatures, every single thing. Then one rainy Tuesday in August of 1997, I sat Harold Mercer down in our office and gave him 2 choices. Walk away quietly, sign everything over, disappear. Or I hand the evidence to federal investigators and let prison introduce itself personally. Harold chose to disappear, and I rebuilt alone. What I did not know, what nobody ever told me, was that Harold Mercer had a younger cousin, a boy barely 12 years old at the time, a boy who grew up hearing only one version of that story, Victor Calloway. I looked up from the papers. Victor was watching me with the kind of satisfaction people wear when they think they finally cornered somebody powerful. You remember him, he said softly. Oh, I remember Harold, I answered calmly. Savannah looked completely lost now. Mom, who is Harold Mercer? Before I could answer, Victor leaned forward. The man your mother destroyed. Now Ethan finally looked up sharply. Dad. No, Victor snapped quietly. She deserves to hear this. Savannah stared at me, confused, heartbroken. Mom. I took a slow breath. Your grandfather's last name wasn't Bennett originally, I said gently. It was Mercer. Her eyes widened immediately, because suddenly pieces started connecting. The company names, the hidden history, the tension. Victor nodded like a man unveiling a masterpiece. Harold spent the rest of his life broke, he said. Humiliated. Sick. My family watched him fall apart while Lorraine Bennett built herself into a billionaire. Diane added softly. He died believing he'd been robbed. Now listen carefully, because this is the exact moment the entire table changed. Savannah slowly turned toward Ethan. Not angry. Not yet. Just confused. Did you know about this? Ethan swallowed hard. I knew there was history between the families, he admitted quietly. That sentence hit Savannah like a slap. You knew. Not like this, he said quickly. I swear to God, Savannah, I didn't know they were gonna do this tonight. Victor ignored him completely. His eyes stayed locked on me. We came here for accountability, he said firmly. No, he came for revenge. Big difference. I closed the folder carefully. Then I smiled. Not because anything was funny, but because Victor Calloway had made one enormous mistake. He thought he was the only person at that table who came prepared. Honey, he had no idea who he was dealing with. I folded my hands calmly. Victor, I said softly, before this conversation goes any further. I tilted my head slightly. There's something you should probably know about me. And for the very first time that night, his confidence flickered. Now I want y'all to understand something very clearly. At my age, instincts become survival tools. And the second Victor Calloway mentioned family history over the phone earlier that week, I started making calls. See, people like Victor think revenge makes them strategic. But revenge actually makes folks sloppy. Emotional people rush. Experienced people prepare. So while he was busy building dramatic dinner speeches in the mirror somewhere, I was digging up 30-year-old records. And unlike him, I brought originals. Victor sat there watching me carefully. "You were saying?" he asked. I smiled softly. "Victor, sweetheart. Harold Mercer did not lose his company because I stole from him." I leaned forward slightly. "He lost it because he stole from me first." Silence. Savannah looked between us so fast I thought that poor child might get whiplash. Diane crossed her arms immediately. Defensive. People do that when the truth starts entering the room uninvited. Victor gave a cold smile. "That's convenient." "No," I replied calmly. "Convenient would have been me letting the FBI handle him back in 1997. That landed hard." Even Ethan straightened in his chair. Victor's expression shifted slightly. Tiny crack. But I saw it. See, powerful people survive by noticing small things. A twitch. A pause. A delayed breath. That's where truth leaks out first. I reached down beside my chair and picked up my purse. Now listen. A wealthy older woman reaching into her purse at dinner usually means lipstick. Maybe reading glasses. In my case, evidence. I placed a thin black folder directly beside his cream-colored envelope. And honey, the entire energy at that table changed. "What's that?" Diane asked carefully. "The full story," I answered. Victor didn't touch it. Smart man. Probably scared to. So I opened it myself. Inside were bank statements, signed affidavits, tax records, copies of old wire transfers, and one very important document with Harold Mercer's signature sitting bold across the bottom. I slid it toward Victor. "That," I said quietly, "is Harold admitting he diverted company money into shell accounts registered under his sister-in-law's name." Victor stared at the page. Didn't move. Didn't blink. But his jaw tightened so hard I thought the man might crack a tooth. "That's fake," Diane snapped immediately. "No ma'am," I said politely. "That's notarized." Ethan slowly leaned forward, his executive instincts finally kicking in. "Dad," he said carefully, "did you ever actually see evidence she stole from Harold?" Victor didn't answer immediately. And that silence. Honey, silence tells the truth faster than words ever will. Savannah noticed it too. I watched my daughter's face slowly change. Confusion first. Then hurt. Then something colder. "Victor?" she asked quietly. Still no answer. That's when I knew. He had never truly investigated the story. He inherited it emotionally and treated it like fact. Lord, that happens in families more than people realize. One bitter man tells a painful story enough times, and eventually grief starts dressing itself up as truth. Victor finally looked up at me. "You threatened him," he said quietly. "I gave him a choice. You ruined his life." "No," I said firmly. Harold ruined his own life the second greed became more important than integrity. Diane scoffed. "Oh please. Men make mistakes in business all the time." I turned toward her slowly. "Ma'am, stealing millions from your business partner isn't a mistake." That shut her clean up. Ethan rubbed both hands over his face now. That man looked like somebody had dropped a piano on his soul. Savannah finally turned toward him. "Did you know your parents planned this?" "Not like this," he said immediately. "But you knew something." He hesitated. "And baby, hesitation has destroyed more relationships than lies ever did." "I knew there was history," he admitted quietly. "My dad said your mother hurt our family years ago and deserved to finally face it." Savannah looked devastated. Not angry yet. Heartbroken. That's worse. Because anger can recover. Disappointment lingers. "Ethan," she whispered. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I thought it was old family drama," he said honestly. I swear I didn't know he was bringing documents or trying to pressure your mom. Victor interrupted sharply. We are trying to pressure her. Finally, there it was. The truth. No more fake politeness. No more civilized smiles. Just greed and resentment sitting naked at the dinner table. Victor straightened his cufflinks slowly. Lorraine Bennett became wealthy while my family buried Harold, he said coldly. I think some financial restitution is reasonable. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was pathetic. 30 years of bitterness leading to this moment. An expensive restaurant. Fake ambush. And a grown man trying to shake down a grandmother in a cardigan. Lord. I folded my hands calmly. How much? Savannah's head snapped toward me. Mom. Victor answered without hesitation. 20 million. Now Ethan looked physically ill. Even Diane seemed startled he said it out loud that fast. And me? Baby, I leaned back in my chair and started laughing. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just tired. Disappointed laughter. The kind older women make when somebody underestimates them so badly, it becomes embarrassing for everyone involved. Victor frowned. You think this is funny? No, I said softly. I think it's sad. The restaurant suddenly felt very quiet around us. Even Savannah stopped moving. I looked directly at Victor. You spent 30 years carrying another man's bitterness, I said gently. And after all that time, this is what you came for? His face hardened immediately. You owe us. No, I answered. Harold owed himself honesty. That's what killed him. Victor stood up abruptly. Not dramatic, but angry enough the silverware rattled slightly. Diane grabbed his arm. Victor. No, he snapped. This woman destroyed my family and now she sits there acting morally superior? I stayed calm, because calmness terrifies emotional people, especially when they're losing control. Sit down, I told him quietly. And honey, he actually almost did. That's the funny thing about authority. Real authority doesn't need volume. Victor caught himself halfway and remained standing. His pride wouldn't let him obey me publicly, but the instinct was there. Ethan noticed too. I could see it in his face. The realization. The understanding that the older woman he thought baked pies and watched crime reruns all day was actually the most dangerous person at the table. Then Savannah spoke. And Lord, my daughter's voice broke my heart a little. Ethan, she whispered, what exactly was supposed to happen tonight? Nobody answered immediately. That silence said everything. Savannah looked at Victor, then Diane, then Ethan, and finally, she realized. This wasn't dinner. It was a setup, and her boyfriend had brought her mother straight into it. Her eyes started watering instantly. Not dramatic crying. The quiet kind. The painful kind. Sweetheart, I said gently. But Savannah stood up suddenly. No, she whispered shakily. No, I need a second because this is insane. Ethan immediately stood too. Savannah. She stepped back from him. That hurt him. I saw it all over his face. Good. Not because I wanted him punished. Because consequences are how grown folks learn. You brought my mother here for this? She asked quietly. I didn't know. But you knew enough. That sentence sliced clean through him. And before anybody could speak again, I looked directly at Victor Calloway and said the one thing that changed the entire night. Victor, does your son know who actually owns Crestline Industrial? The color drained straight out at Ethan's face. And suddenly, nobody at that table was breathing normally anymore. Now let me tell y'all something about life-changing moments. People think they arrive loud. Screaming. Crying. Somebody flipping a table in a steakhouse. No, baby. The moments that truly change your life usually arrive quietly. One sentence. One truth. One realization that rearranges the entire room. And the second I asked Victor whether Ethan knew who owned Crestline Industrial, everything stopped. Even the restaurant noise felt farther away somehow. Ethan slowly turned toward me. His face had gone completely pale. What does that mean?" he asked carefully. Now remember, Savannah was already emotional. Victor was angry. Diane was defensive. But Ethan? Honey, Ethan looked terrified. And that told me something important immediately. He wasn't scared of losing money. He was scared of realizing he'd been manipulated. Big difference. I picked up my water glass calmly. "Ethan," I said softly, "how much do you actually know about how you got your CEO position?" He blinked. "What?" "The recruiting process," I continued. "The executive board. The offer package. The interviews." He frowned slightly. "I was recruited through a private executive search firm." "You were?" "I interviewed with the board." "Yes. And?" I smiled politely. "That board answers to me." Silence. Lord have mercy. The look on Ethan's face. That man looked like somebody unplugged his entire nervous system. Savannah stared at me wide-eyed. "Mom." Victor frowned immediately. "What are you talking about?" I folded my hands neatly. "Crestline Industrial," I said calmly, "is owned entirely by Bennett Cross Holdings." Diane looked confused. Victor looked irritated. But Ethan? Baby Ethan already understood. Smart men process danger fast. And I watched the exact moment realization hit him. "You," he whispered slowly. "Yes." I nodded once. "I own the company." Absolute silence. Even Savannah stopped breathing for a second. Now listen carefully because this part matters. I didn't reveal it dramatically. No yelling. No arrogance. That's not how real power behaves. Real power simply states facts and lets everyone else panic around it. Victor laughed first. One short disbelieving laugh. "That's impossible." "No, sir," I replied calmly. "It's public record if you know where to look." Ethan sat back down slowly like his legs suddenly forgot how chairs work. "You're the owner?" he asked quietly. "For the last 24 years. His eyes widened. "And you knew I worked there this entire time?" "Yes." Savannah looked between us in complete disbelief. "Wait. Mom, you never told him." "Nope." "Why?" I looked at Ethan directly. "Because I wanted to know who he was before money started affecting his behavior." Ethan rubbed his face hard. Lord, that poor man looked like he needed oxygen. "So all this time?" "Yes," I interrupted gently. "The quarterly reports you presented?" "Mine." "The executive reviews?" "Mine." "The salary package you negotiated?" "Approved by me personally." Victor finally stopped smiling. Because now he understood the problem. A very big problem. See, he came into that restaurant thinking he held leverage over an older woman with a hidden past. Instead, he discovered his son's entire career sat inside my hands. And baby, that realization hit him like a truck. Diane spoke first. "You're telling me Ethan's been working for you this entire time?" "Yes, ma'am." "And you hid this?" I smiled softly. I prefer the phrase observed quietly. Savannah actually covered her mouth trying not to laugh through the stress. That's my girl. Even in disaster, humor survives. Ethan looked at me again. And for the first time since dinner started, there was no polished executive confidence left. Just honesty. Raw honesty. "You gave me that job?" "Not exactly," I answered. "You earned it. Your qualifications were real. Your interviews were legitimate." I paused. I simply opened the door. Now that part mattered to me. Because contrary to what Victor clearly believed, I never handed Ethan power because he was dating my daughter. I handed him opportunity because he was capable. And honestly, that made this entire mess hurt worse. Because somewhere along the way I had started respecting him. Victor leaned forward suddenly. So this was all some kind of game to you? No, I said sharply for the first time all evening. This was me protecting my daughter. That shut him up. Immediately, I looked directly at Ethan. When Savannah brought you home, I saw ambition in you. Intelligence too. But ambitious men sometimes confuse love with opportunity. Savannah lowered her eyes quietly. She understood exactly why I did it. Ethan nodded slowly. You were testing me. I was studying you. He exhaled deeply through his nose. And what did you decide? Now that question right there. That question mattered. Because the truth was complicated. I studied him for nearly a year. Watched him inside boardrooms. Watched how he treated assistants, warehouse workers, executives, drivers, people beneath him socially. That tells you everything about somebody. I leaned back slightly. I decided you were very good at your job. Ethan blinked. That's it. No, I said softly. I also decided you genuinely loved my daughter. Savannah's eyes instantly filled again. And Ethan? Honey, the relief that crossed that man's face nearly broke my heart. Because for the first time all night, somebody finally understood I wasn't their enemy. Victor, however, looked furious now. You manipulated my son. I laughed softly. Sir, you brought fraudulent emotional blackmail to dinner. Diane inhaled sharply. Savannah almost choked, trying not to laugh again. And Ethan? That fool actually smiled for half a second before remembering we were still in a disaster. Victor pointed toward the envelope. You threatened Harold Mercer. No, I corrected calmly. I gave a dishonest man consequences. You destroyed him. He destroyed himself. Victor slammed his hand lightly against the table. Not enough to make a scene. Just enough to reveal emotion. There's always two sides to every story. Yes, I agreed quietly. And tonight you finally heard both. That sentence hit harder than yelling ever could. The table went silent again. Then Ethan slowly turned toward his father. And baby, something had changed in his face. The confusion was gone now. What replaced it was colder, clearer. How long? He asked quietly. Victor frowned. What? How long have you known Lorraine owned the company? No answer. That itself was an answer. Ethan nodded slowly. You knew before Savannah and I got serious, didn't you? Victor adjusted his cufflinks. Delay tactic. Classic. I suspected. And you never told me? I was protecting our family. No, Ethan said quietly. You were positioning me. Lord. There it was. The moment the son finally saw the father clearly. And honey, that realization hurts worse than heartbreak ever will. Diane grabbed Ethan's arm gently. Sweetheart, your father was trying to protect your uncle's memory. Ethan pulled his arm away slowly. No, he said. He was trying to use me. Victor's face darkened immediately. Watch your tone. No, you watch yours, Savannah snapped suddenly. Everybody froze. Because my daughter had officially reached her limit. She looked directly at Ethan now. Pain all over her face. Tell me honestly, she whispered. When we started dating, was any part of this about my mother? Ethan looked horrified. She even asked. No. God, Savannah, no. But your father knew. Yes. And you still brought me here tonight. That sentence crushed him. I could see it. Because sometimes good men make weak decisions trying to avoid conflict. And weak decisions still hurt people. Ethan lowered his head briefly. You're right, he admitted quietly. I should have stopped this the second I realized what my father was doing. Now that got my attention. No excuses. No deflecting. Just accountability. Rare thing these days. Very rare. I looked at him for a long moment. Then finally said, well, at least one Callaway man learned something tonight. And Victor? Honey. Victor looked like I'd slapped him with the Bible itself. Then Ethan finally looked up. And Lord, that man looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. Like somebody had pulled the floor out from underneath his entire understanding of his own family. He looked directly at me. Miss Lorraine. That pause hurt him. I could hear it. Because earlier tonight he would have called me family without hesitation. Now he wasn't sure he had the right. I need to ask you something honestly. Go ahead. When you hired me, did you already know who my father was? Yes. He closed his eyes briefly. And you still trusted me with the company? Now that question mattered. Because everybody at that table needed the answer. Especially Savannah. I folded my hands carefully. I trusted actions, I answered. Not bloodlines. Victor scoffed quietly. But Ethan looked stunned. So I continued. You improved operations. Increased profits. Protected employees from layoffs. You earned respect inside that company without even knowing I was watching. I paused. And believe me, I was watching. Savannah let out the tiniest emotional laugh through her tears. That's when Ethan finally asked the question sitting heavy in the room all night. Am I fired? Straight to the point. Theo brain. Even now. And baby, the way that man asked it told me everything about him. He wasn't asking about money. He was asking whether tonight erased who he'd proven himself to be. I leaned back slowly. Do you deserve to be? He swallowed hard. Yes. Now that surprised me. Not the answer. The honesty. Victor immediately snapped. Ethan, stop talking like that. But Ethan ignored him completely. No, he said quietly. I brought Savannah and Lorraine into this mess. I knew enough to stop tonight before it started, and I didn't. Savannah looked at him silently. Hurting. Listening. Ethan turned toward her fully now. Baby, I swear to you. I never dated you because of money. I know, she whispered immediately. And that right there? That was the first crack of healing. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But truth. Real truth. Victor stood abruptly again. I'm done sitting here listening to my son apologize to these people. These people. Funny how quickly family language disappears when greed loses. Ethan stood too this time. But not to follow him. To face him. And honey, that moment changed everything. Dad, Ethan said quietly, you used me. Victor laughed bitterly. Oh please. No, Ethan continued firmly. You found out Lorraine owned Crestline before I even got serious with Savannah. Victor didn't answer. Again. Silence. Truth's favorite language. Ethan nodded slowly. You saw an opportunity. I saw justice. You saw money. That one hit hard enough Diane actually flinched. Victor's face darkened instantly. You ungrateful little. No, Ethan interrupted sharply. You don't get to guilt me because your revenge plan failed. Lord. The entire table froze. Because sons don't usually talk to fathers like that unless something inside finally breaks. Victor stared at him in disbelief. And for the first time all night, he looked old. Not physically. Spiritually. Like decades of anger suddenly weighed too much to carry. Diane stood slowly. Victor, maybe we should leave. He looked around the table one last time. At me. At Savannah. At Ethan. And I think somewhere deep down he realized something painful. He hadn't avenged Harold tonight. He'd simply lost his son. Victor grabbed his jacket stiffly. This family deserves each other. Then he walked away. Diane hesitated beside Ethan, torn clean in half between husband and child. Mama, Ethan said quietly. Her eyes filled instantly. I never wanted this, she whispered. I know. And honestly, I believed her. She touched his shoulder gently before following Victor out of the restaurant. And just like that, the storm ended. Quietly. The waiter appeared again 2 minutes later looking terrified. Poor thing probably thought somebody was about to start throwing wine glasses. He said nervously. Would anybody care for dessert? Honey. Savannah burst out laughing so suddenly she nearly cried harder. Even I smiled. And Ethan? That man looked so emotionally exhausted he laughed too. I wiped my eyes gently. You know what? I said. Bring me the chocolate cake. The waiter looked relieved enough to ascend directly into heaven. And coffee, I added. Strong enough to restart a heart. Yes, ma'am. He disappeared immediately. Savannah leaned her head against my shoulder quietly, just like she used to when she was little. I'm sorry, Mom. Oh, baby, I whispered. None of this was your fault. Ethan sat across from us looking like a man waiting for a verdict. And finally, I decided to stop torturing him. Ethan. Yes, ma'am. You still have a job Monday morning. The relief that hit his face nearly knocked the air out of the room. Miss Lorraine, Don't thank me yet, I interrupted. You and I are having a very long private conversation in my office Monday. That actually made Savannah laugh again. Oh Lord, she muttered. You're about to get corporate grandma interrogation. I survived tonight, Ethan sighed. How bad could Monday be? Honey, the fact he could joke after all this told me more about his character than any background check ever could. Dessert arrived. Coffee too. And for the first time all evening, nobody was pretending anymore. No manipulation. No performance. Just 3 tired people trying to breathe after emotional warfare over steak and mashed potatoes. By the time dinner ended, the rain outside had stopped. Savannah hugged me tightly in the parking lot. Ethan stood nearby awkwardly like a teenage boy waiting outside the principal's office. I looked at him for a long moment. You hurt my daughter tonight, I said calmly. His face dropped immediately. I know. But hope flickered slightly in his eyes. You also stood up and told the truth when it mattered. He nodded silently. And that, I said softly, is the only reason I still believe you deserve her. Baby. That man looked seconds away from crying right there beside the valet stand. Instead he simply whispered, I love her. I know you do. Then Savannah took his hand. Not fully forgiven. Not fully healed. But still there. That mattered. I drove home alone that night in my old silver Buick with the heater making that weird clicking sound it always makes when temperatures drop. The city lights blurred past my windows while I thought about Harold Mercer. About bitterness. About family. About how dangerous old pain becomes when people feed it too long. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my porch light was glowing against the dark, and my rose bushes were dripping rainwater beneath the moonlight. Home. Peace. The things money can't buy once you lose them. My phone buzzed before I reached the front door. A text from Savannah. Ethan says you're terrifying and weirdly inspirational. I smiled immediately. Then another message appeared. And he says he's never underestimating a woman in house shoes again. I laughed so hard my neighbor's dog started barking. Then I typed back. Good. That lesson alone was worth dessert. I slipped my phone into my pocket and stood there quietly for a second listening to the night air. Some people build empires to impress strangers. I built mine to protect my family. There's a difference. And tonight, everybody finally understood it. Now listen to your grandma for a second, sweetheart. Don't let bitterness live in your heart too long. A person carrying old anger will eventually hurt themselves and everybody around them. Tell the truth early. Pay attention to people's actions, not just their words. And never mistake kindness for weakness. Because some of the strongest people you'll ever meet are the quiet ones who already survived battles nobody knows about. Thank you for watching, sweetheart. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And remember, never underestimate a grandma with wisdom and strong instincts. See y'all in the next story.